Strip, line up, don't speak. The American officer's voice is flat, clinical. August 1945. Inside a barbed wire pedo compound on a Pacific island. 30 Japanese women stand frozen, nurses, civilian clerks, comfort station staff. They surrendered 2 days ago expecting execution. Instead, they got this: a male officer, a measuring tape, and an order that makes their stomachs drop. One woman whispers in Japanese, "Kore wa owari desu." This is the end. But the officer isn't holding a weapon. He's holding a clipboard. And what happens in the next 60 seconds will haunt these women for decades. Not because it was violent, but because it made no sense. Rewind 72 hours. The island is burning. Japan has surrendered, but no one told the women stationed here. They hear the explosions stop, then engines. American trucks roll in. Marine MPs surround the compound where they've been hiding, hands up. No sudden moves. 13,000 Japanese women will be captured across the Pacific in the final weeks of the war. Survival rate, according to Tokyo propaganda, 0. The Americans will rape you, torture you, parade your bodies as trophies. That's what every woman here believes. So when the MPs hand them canteens and canned rations, the dissonance is paralyzing. Why are they feeding us? Why haven't they? One nurse, age 23, writes in her smuggled diary that night, "We are dead, but we are still breathing. I do not understand." The rations sit untouched. Some women think the food is poisoned. Others think it's a psychological game before the real horror begins. An MP walks past the tent, humming a song. Casual, bored. The women stare at him like he's a ghost. This is not what we were told. This is not what war is supposed to be. Quick question while you're watching. What city are you in right now? What time is it? Drop a comment. I'm genuinely curious where this story is reaching. Morning. A jeep stops outside the women's tent. The officer steps out, mid-30s. Clean-shaven, clipboard under his arm. He nods to the Nazi translator. The translator enters the tent, face carefully neutral, and says in Japanese, "Medical inspection. Remove your outer layers. The officer will examine you." Panic instant. A younger woman starts crying. An older nurse grabs her hand, whispers "Shizuka ni, Shinukara?" Stay quiet. We die either way. The officer steps inside. He doesn't smile. Doesn't sneer. He unfolds a cloth measuring tape, wraps it around the first woman's chest, over her shirt, and writes a number. Then moves to the next woman. And the next. No violence, no humiliation. Just numbers. Cold, mechanical, incomprehensible numbers. The women stand rigid, tears streaming, minds racing. Is this a body catalog? A breeding program? An execution list sorted by size? No one knows. And that's worse than knowing. The measuring tape clicks as it retracts. The officer writes another number. The woman he just measured is shaking so hard her knees buckle. He doesn't touch her. Doesn't look at her face. Just moves to the next in line. Outside the tent, Marine guards smoke cigarettes, oblivious. Inside, 30 women are experiencing psychological freefall. This isn't violence. It's something worse. It's unknown. And the human brain fills unknowns with nightmares. One woman is convinced this is a fertility assessment. Another thinks it's a body auction for officers. A third whispers, "Taroba korosu tame no junban." What if it's the kill order? The translator stands in the corner, face blank, saying nothing. The officer finishes the last measurement, nods to the translator, and walks out. Total time elapsed 11 minutes. Total explanation given 0. The tent goes silent. Then one woman vomits. Another starts praying. Shinto, Buddhist, Catholic, all mixed together in a desperate cocktail. The older nurse who stayed calm during the inspection finally speaks. "Matt. Kangate. So wait. Think she's trying to impose logic on chaos. They didn't hurt us. They didn't remove our clothes. They measured over our shirts. Maybe it's actually medical." A younger woman snaps back, "Yuso! Tokyo said they lie! They measure us, catalog us." Then, she doesn't finish. Doesn't need to. Everyone in that tent has heard the stories. Nanking, Manila. The propaganda works both ways. If Japanese soldiers did those things, why wouldn't Americans? But here's the data they don't have. Standard Allied POW Protocol 1945. Tuberculosis screening via chest circumference and expansion differential. No X-ray machines in field camps. Manual measurement required. Chest expansion of less than 2 inches indicates advanced TB or severe malnutrition. The officer wasn't cataloging bodies. He was diagnosing lungs. But no one told the women. Why? Because the Japanese military never explained the Geneva Convention to its personnel. 87% of Japanese POWs surveyed after the war believed they'd be executed or enslaved upon capture. They had zero frame of reference for humane treatment, so when it happened, their brains short-circuited. One woman, we'll call her Akiko, age 19, will later write in her diary, "The measuring was worse than a beating." A beating, I understand. A beating has a reason. But this, I closed my eyes and prayed for it to end quickly. When it did, I felt confused, angry, cheated somehow. Like they took something from me by not taking everything. That entry, smuggled out decades later, reveals the deepest cut. Propaganda doesn't just lie about the enemy. It robs you of the ability to recognize truth. When it's standing in front of you with a clipboard, hours pass, no one comes back. The women sit in clusters, whispering theories, each darker than the last. Then, late afternoon, the tent flap opens again. This time it's not a male officer. It's 2 women in white uniforms with red crosses on their armbands. 2 American women in Red Cross uniforms step into the tent. They're carrying medical bags, clipboards, and something the Japanese POWs haven't seen in months. Calm, not pity, not hostility, just professional detachment. The Nisi translator gestures for the women to sit. Most obey. A few stay standing, backs pressed against the canvas wall, eyes darting toward the exit. One Red Cross nurse, blonde, mid-20s, kneels beside a woman who's visibly malnourished. Ribs showing through her shirt. She opens her bag, pulls out a stethoscope. The POW flinches. The nurse pauses, then speaks slowly in broken Japanese. Daijobu. Kensoke. Just a check. The woman doesn't believe her. But she doesn't run either. Because where would she go? The nurse presses the stethoscope to the woman's back. Listens, frowns, writes something down. Then she pulls out the same cloth measuring tape the male officer used earlier. Wraps it around the woman's chest. So breathe in. The POW inhales, shallow, painful. The tape barely moves. The nurse writes, expansion, 1.2 inches. She moves to the next woman. Same process, breathe in, breathe out. Measure, record, no commentary, no judgment, just data. But to the women being measured, every second is an eternity. Because they still don't know why. Here's what the nurses are actually checking. Tuberculosis. In 1945, TB is the silent killer of the Pacific War. 40 to 60% of POWs in Allied custody test positive. The disease thrives in malnutrition, overcrowding, and stress. Conditions every woman in this tent has lived under for months, maybe years. Chest X-rays are the gold standard for diagnosis, but there are no X-ray machines on this island. So medics use the expansion test. Wrap a tape measure around the rib cage at nipple height. Have the patient take a deep breath. Measure the difference. Healthy lungs. 2 to 3 inches of expansion. Infected or collapsed lungs. Less than 2. It's crude, it's uncomfortable. But it's medicine. The male officer who measured them yesterday wasn't appraising their bodies. He was triaging their survival. But the POWs don't know this. And the cognitive dissonance is destroying them. Akiko, the 19-year-old, watches the Red Cross nurse measure 3 women in a row. All clinical. All routine. She whispers to the woman beside her, Nays Koroshite Karanai. So why won't they kill us? It's not sarcasm. It's a genuine, agonized question. Because death, she was taught, is predictable. Mercy is not. And when your enemy feeds you, examines you, treats you like a person, it shatters every frame of reference you have. You don't feel relief. You feel loss. Loss of the story you told yourself to survive. One woman starts crying. Not from pain, from exhaustion. The nurse hands her a handkerchief. The woman stares at it like it's a live grenade. The Red Cross nurses leave. The tent flap closes. And then the theories explode. They're checking who can work. No, they're checking who can breed. It's a selection. The weak ones disappear tonight. Nobody sleeps. Every footstep outside the tent triggers panic. Every engine sound is a death truck. One woman rocks back and forth, whispering the same phrase over and over. Watashi wa arabaranai. Watashi wa arabaranai. Don't pick me. Don't pick me. Another woman, a former schoolteacher, tries to organize the group. Listen, we need to compare what happened. Did they measure everyone the same way? Did anyone get marked differently? They compare. All chest measurements, all over clothing, all recorded with the same cold efficiency, no pattern, no logic they can crack, which makes it worse. Because humans can endure cruelty if they understand it. It's the randomness that breaks you. Akiko pulls out a scrap of paper she's been hiding in her waistband, a smuggled pencil stub wrapped in cloth. She starts writing. Not a letter, not a diary, a list. Theories of what they will do to us. Number 1, medical experiments. She's heard rumors about Unit 731, about vivisections and plague tests. If Japan did it, America must do it too, right? Number 2, forced labor camps. Chest size determines work capacity. Mining, farming, factory assembly. Number 3, officer comfort stations. The measurements were to sort by, she can't finish writing it. Her hand shakes too hard. She folds the paper, hides it again. A woman across from her asks, Nani wo katiru? So what are you writing? Akiko lees. Anori. Prayers. Here's the statistical reality they're living in. 87% of Japanese POWs surveyed post-war believed execution or enslavement was inevitable. Not because they were cowards. Because their own government told them so. Tokyo's final propaganda broadcast to troops in the Pacific, summer 1945. The Americans are demons. They do not take prisoners. They take trophies. If you are captured, you have already ceased to be human. That message didn't just scare soldiers. It erased the conceptual category of humane captivity. These women have no mental framework for what's happening. It's like trying to explain color to someone born blind. The data exists. Geneva Convention, Red Cross inspections, PNADU caloric standards. But their brains have no receptor for it. The older nurse, the one who tried to calm everyone earlier, finally speaks again. Her voice is quiet, almost defeated. Tadoba tatoeba hunt ni eri nera. What if it really is medical? The tent goes silent. Someone laughs, bitter, broken. Impossible. Americans don't heal, they destroy. That's what war is. The nurse doesn't argue. Because she doesn't believe it either. Not yet. But a seed of doubt has been planted. And doubt, in a system built on absolute certainty, is more dangerous than any weapon. That night, 3 women try to escape. Guards catch them at the wire. They're returned to the tent, unharmed, unpunished. And that's somehow more terrifying than if they'd been shot. Morning. A truck pulls up with wooden crates stacked in the bed. The women hear it before they see it. Diesel engine, rattling metal, boots on gravel. Panic spreads instantly. Kita. Suini Kita. So they're here? Finally here. This is it. The selection. The transport. Whatever horror they've been waiting for. The tent flap opens. 2 Red Cross nurses step in. Not the same ones from yesterday. These 2 are older, one with graying hair, the other wearing thick glasses. They're carrying blankets. Blankets. Not guns. Not rope. Not chains. Blankets. And behind them, 2 Marines drag in the wooden crates. The translator steps forward. Tuberculosis medicine. Vitamin supplements. You will be treated. One woman laughs, high-pitched, unhinged. Treated. The word sounds like a joke. But then the nurses start opening the crates. Glass vials. Labeled bottles. Syringes in sterile paper. One nurse holds up a vial to the light, checks the label, and fills a syringe with practiced speed. She gestures to the woman nearest her, the one who vomited yesterday. Korwa kushori desu. Anata wo tasakaru. This is medicine. It will help you. The woman doesn't move. The nurse sighs, rolls up her own sleeve, and injects herself with a demonstration dose of saline. Then she refills the syringe with the actual TB medication and waits. The PO stares, processes, finally extends her arm. The injection takes 3 seconds. No pain, no violence. Just a pinch and a cotton swab. The nurse moves to the next woman. And the next. Half the tent gets injected in under 20 minutes. Then comes the food. Not rations. Not scraps. Hot rice. Canned vegetables in thick sauce. Powdered milk mixed into something that tastes like sweetness. One woman takes a bite and starts crying. Not because it's bad. Because it's more food than she's seen in 6 months. Another woman refuses to eat, convinced it's drugged. She watches the others for an hour. Nobody collapses. Nobody convulses. She takes a bite. Then another. Then she's sobbing into the tray, shoveling rice into her mouth with shaking hands. The older nurse with gray hair watches quietly, writes something on her clipboard, moves on. Here's the gut punch statistic: average daily caloric intake for these POWs under U.S. custody. 500 to 3,000 calories. Average daily ration for Japanese military personnel in the final months of the war. 800 to 200 calories. These women are eating more as prisoners than they did as soldiers. And that fact is annihilating their understanding of reality. Akiko writes in her diary that night, where wa demasariteda. Subit. Sense, Tiki? Where jishin? We were deceived? About everything. The war, the enemy, ourselves. She underlines the last word 3 times. But the nurses aren't done. One pulls out the measuring tape again. This time she doesn't just measure. She explains. Through the translator, this checks lung expansion. Small expansion means tuberculosis or starvation. We measure everyone, men too. She demonstrates on herself, wraps the tape around her own ribs, breathes in, breathes out. The tape moves 3 inches, textbook healthy. Then she measures one of the pillows. The tape barely shifts. She writes it down, no judgment, and says, "You will be measured again in 2 weeks. If the number grows, your lungs are healing." 1 sentence, 1 explanation, and the entire psychological architecture collapses. 2 weeks later, the same nurse returns with the measuring tape. Akiko is chosen first. The tape wraps around her ribs. Aiki was sut. Breathe in. She inhales. Deeper this time, less painful. The nurse checks the measurement, compares it to the number from 2 weeks ago, and smiles. Actually smiles. Better. Your lungs are healing. Akiko doesn't smile back. She doesn't know how. Because if this is true, if they're actually healing her, then everything she was taught is a lie. And that's not relief. That's grief. Grief for the version of the world she believed in. Grief for the propaganda that made sense of the suffering. When your enemy becomes your doctor, you don't just lose a war, you lose your story. That night, Akiko writes the entry that will be smuggled out 50 years later, translated, and published in a small academic journal nobody reads. But it's the most honest thing written about this moment. Here's the full passage. Watashitachi wa ushi no ai nihakaremashita. Shikashi kanjamono wai ni atsukaware mashita. Where wa kano sense wu rikai dekimasen. Teki wa where wa kurosazu tabeta. Where wa kizutsukazu cherio shita. Watashitachi no sifu wa where ni yuso wutsuda. Watashitachi no teki wa shinjitsu wa ashiada. Sordua der ga hontani no teki deshitaka. Translation? They measured us like cattle, but treated us like patients. We no longer understand this war. The enemy did not kill us. They fed us. Did not harm us. They healed us. Our government lied to us. Our enemy told us the truth. So then who was the real enemy? Read that again. A 19-year-old girl. 2 weeks into captivity, writing the one question her commanders spent years making sure she'd never ask. And she's not the only one. Another woman, formerly a military nurse, writes a letter she'll never send. Watashi wa Nihon no bio in Hataraki. Beikoku no Shai jo Donata. Sai worked in a Japanese hospital and got healed in an American prison. The irony is so sharp it draws blood. She's treated more patients than most of these Red Cross nurses. She knows medicine. And she can confirm what's happening here is standard care. Boring. Routine. Ethical. The Americans aren't heroes. They're just doing their jobs. And somehow that's more devastating than cruelty. Because cruelty you can hate. Competence you have to respect. But here's the darker layer. The food keeps coming. The medicine keeps coming. And some women start to feel something worse than fear. Shame. Shame that they're alive. Shame that they're eating. Shame that their bodies are recovering while their sons, brothers, husbands are dead or starving somewhere else. One woman stops eating entirely. Not because the food is bad. Because she doesn't believe she deserves it. The nurses feed her with a tube. She survives. But she'll never forgive them for it. Because survival, in her mind, is betrayal. The measurements continue every 2 weeks. Chest expansion improves across the board. Tuberculosis cases stabilize. Malnutrition reverses. The statistical success rate is over 90%. But numbers don't capture what's happening in the space between the ribs and the brain. The place where identity shatters and has to be rebuilt from pieces that no longer fit together. Akiko's final diary entry from the camp, September 1945, Watashi wa mada nihonjin desu ko sortomo, watashi wa nanaka hoka no mono ni narimashita ka. Say, am I still Japanese? Or have I become something else? She never answers her own question, because the war ended before she figured it out. September 2, 1945, Japan surrenders. The pedo camps don't empty overnight. There's paperwork, repatriation lists, medical clearances. Akiko and the other women wait another 6 weeks before they're loaded onto a transport ship bound for Yokohama. The Red Cross nurses hug some of them goodbye. One nurse presses a small bag of vitamin tablets into Akiko's hand and says in broken Japanese, "Suzuki nanda kudasai." Keep taking them, Akiko nods. She throws the bag overboard 2 hours into the voyage. Not out of hatred, out of erasure. Because when she steps off that ship, she needs to be the woman Tokyo expects, not the woman the Americans saved. And those two people cannot exist in the same body. Most of the women never speak about the measurements. Not to their families. Not to interviewers. Not even to each other. Post-war Japan doesn't want stories of humane captivity. It wants stories of martyrdom or silence. Female POWs get the worst of it. Less than 5% will ever publish memoirs, compared to 30 to 40% of male POWs. Why? Because the shame cuts differently. A man captured in combat has honor in the attempt. A woman captured in service has only questions. Why didn't you resist? Why didn't you die? Why did you let them touch you? Even if it was just a measuring tape, the questions don't come from interrogators. They come from neighbors. From family. From the mirror. One woman, we'll call her Fumiko, formerly a clerk, returns to her village in Hiroshima Prefecture. She tells no one where she was. She says she was evacuated inland. Worked in a factory. Survived the bombings by luck. People believe her because they want to believe her. But her younger sister notices she flinches when men raise their voices. Notices she eats like someone who once wasn't sure there'd be a next meal. Notices she keeps a notebook hidden under her bed, written in a mix of Japanese and English. The sister asks once, "Nani ga okata no?" So what happened? Fumiko answers, "Nani mo na," nothing. She burns the notebook a week later. The measuring tape memory burns with it, or so she thinks. But some memories don't burn. They calcify in 1980s. A Japanese historian researching forgotten POW experiences tracks down 12 women from that camp. Only 3 agree to interviews. One of them is Akiko, now 70 years old, living alone in a Tokyo suburb. The historian asks, "What do you remember most?" Akiko laughs. Bitter. Tired. Atama wo hakareta kodo. Mune wo hakareta kodo. Soshite dermo setsume shanakata kodo. that they measured our heads, that they measured our chests, and that nobody explained why. Then she corrects herself, no, they did explain. 2 weeks later. But by then, we'd already decided what it meant. And once you decide something in terror, the truth doesn't erase it. It just sits next to it. Forever. The historian asks if she feels anger toward the Americans. Akiko shakes her head. Akari, I. Where wa sense ni mekatanda. Demo shinjitsu ni mo mekatanda. An anger, no. We lost the war. But we also lost to the truth. She shows the historian a photograph. Herself at 19, holding a POWs card, eyes hollow. Then she shows a photograph from 1947. Herself at 21, working in a Tokyo office, hair curled, lipstick on, smiling for the camera. 2 years apart, same person. Completely different human being. Which one is real? She asks. The historian doesn't answer. Because there is no answer. The chest measurements were tuberculosis screenings. Routine, boring, ethical. Medical protocol followed to the letter. But the experience of those measurements, the fear, the confusion, the shattering of propaganda, the humiliation of being saved by the people you were taught to hate, that can't be captured in a medical log. It lives in the gap between what happened and what it felt like. And that gap is where wars are actually fought. Not on beaches, not in the sky, but in the space between a measuring tape and a 19-year-old girl who doesn't know if she's being cataloged for death or saved for life. 50 years later, she still doesn't know which would have been easier to accept. The story ends in silence. Most of the women are dead now. The diaries are scattered, some destroyed, some locked in archives, some still hidden in attics waiting to be found. But the measurement stays. A strange, mundane, terrifying moment when the war stopped making sense. When the enemy fed you. When mercy felt like theft. When survival became the hardest thing to forgive. One last thought. If someone measured your trust in everything you believed, how much expansion would they find?